Good evening. Welcome to day two of the Trump administration, part two. And I'll give you a little behind the scenes here. We're prepared this show all day. We're looking at the news, and I knew this would be a big news day, and it has been. I had about 20, close to 20 Trump-related news items I wanted to share with you, and I was planning to run through them pretty briskly because we have two fantastic guests, and only one of them can only stay with us for the first 30 minutes. And then just as I was getting ready to log on and start to figure out how this was all going to flow, Donald Trump decided to have another nonstop press conference. Let's go to that because it's happening now, live. Now you can see only Fox is taking it live. I don't know how many questions he's already answered. It's a lot. Sure. What's happening there? No. All right. Maybe not. Um, while we wait for that to resolve itself, any event, he's made a ton of news in this press conference, just again, just the way this business works, I was preparing for the show, and in the meantime, I had to try to figure out all the news he was making. So I'm going to do my best to catch up there. I'm going to run through some of the other news that occurred earlier in the day really fast, like a lickety-split pacing. We'll keep monitoring what Trump is saying in the second marathon press conference of his presidency. And then we'll bring in our guests really quick. And our guests are great. Celinda Lake, Democratic pollster and strategist, and Kirsten Davis, Republican. Fantastic people, very knowledgeable. I want to ask them about a bunch of stuff as well. So we'll keep monitoring the press conference. But for now, let me run through a little bit of what's going on in the news. All right. President Trump went to a church service today, and one of the pastors kind of lectured him on being tolerant and having mercy on people in the country who are scared now, listing LGBTQ people, immigrants, children, and people fleeing war zones. President Trump was asked about that afterwards. He didn't appear to be too fazed by it. According to Politico, President Trump met with the Republican congressional leaders today and urged them to reconsider on two issues that they seem to have decided on. He's trying to still persuade them. One is he wants to do recess appointments for some nominees, and he also wants to get Democrats to raise the debt ceiling in exchange for California wildfire relief, something again that had been rejected. We talked this morning on the morning meeting about whether or not Republicans would object to the pardons, mass pardons of the J6 people convicted of crimes related to January 6th, amongst the senators criticizing Donald Trump in one way or another for that move. Lisa Murkowski, Tom Tillis, Shelley Moore Capito, and Senator McConnell. Something I speculated about on the morning meeting this morning. Would the Trump administration move quickly to put in place acting U.S. attorneys who were their people, as opposed to just the number two person or so in the office? Yes, indeed, they started that process today with the most important U.S. attorneys' offices, traditionally, the U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C., and the two U.S. attorneys here in New York in the southern and eastern districts around New York City. President Trump, the event at which he's doing this marathon press conference right now, was to announce a partnership with the private sector, with companies agreeing to invest $50 billion in artificial intelligence infrastructure. Elise Stefanik had her hearing.
Hey, Mark, it's back if you want.
All right, let's go back to Trump then.
European Union is very, very bad to us. They treat us very, very badly. They don't take our cars. They don't take our cars at all. They don't take our farm products, essentially. They don't take very much. We have a $350 billion deficit with the European Union. They treat us very, very badly. So they're going to be in for tariffs. Mr. President. It's the only way you're going to get back. It's the only way you're going to get fairness. You can't get fairness unless you do that. But the European Union's treated us very badly. But essentially, everybody treats us badly. You know, everybody treats us badly. Yes, go ahead. Because we allow them to. Because we've had stupid people doing this, and we can't have. I'd like to have these three people negotiate for us, just for 1 week, and we'd be a rich country again. But we'll be rich.
Mr. President, on AI data centers, will you rescind President Biden's executive order that opens up federal land?
On which centers?
On data centers. Will you rescind President Biden's executive order that opens up federal lands for data centers and energy production?
No, I wouldn't do that. That sounds to me like it's something that I would like. I'd like to see federal lands opened up for data centers. I think they're going to be very important. Again, we have a lot of competition for that. So it's an honor to have these three great people, great CEOs and great geniuses, all three. It's an honor that they want to come to our country, but we're going to make it as easy as we can for them because other countries want them to. I'm going to have to go now. Thank you all very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. President. Saved our show. A couple other stories I'll mention, and then I'm going to bring in our guests, and I'm just going to run through a bunch of stuff, and Noah and my other colleagues will tell us what news came out of that thing because there was some news. First, already seeing lawsuits against some of the initial Trump policies from Democratic attorneys general and others, ACLU and others. This is a very big story because the courts are going to adjudicate these things, and as always happens. But as you know, because Democrats don't have the House or the Senate or the White House, the courts is going to be where a lot of the efforts to push back against some of these Trump policies are. And just objectively, some of them are of questionable legality and constitutionality. So they may win some of these. And then the other thing is various news organizations, I think starting with NBC and the New York Times, but it's now in the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere, are reporting that Pete Hegseth's ex-sister-in-law gave an affidavit to the Armed Services Committee, although he's already been confirmed, passed out of the Armed Services Committee on a strict party line vote, positively to the floor, that she observed him engage in all sorts of behavior, including threatening behavior against his then wife, his second wife, allegations related to drinking, etc. All of the allegations are of a piece with previous allegations that were made. Hegseth's attorney denies the allegations. This story has been talked about in elite circles for a long time. This is the story that many of Hegseth's supporters told me they thought would come out, and they thought would be quite damaging to his confirmation prospects. No senator, as far as I've heard so far, has come out and said they're going to vote no based on these allegations. But this story is evolving, and again, we'll talk about it in a bit as well. But it's an on-the-record allegation. Although the woman who did the affidavit, again, his ex-sister-in-law, she was married to his brother at the same time he was married to his second wife, appears to not be willing to be on camera or to answer questions. She simply is going to rely on the affidavit. All right, lots of stuff. I didn't even get to everything. And again, there's news out of the press conference, but I don't want to waste our time or squander our time with Celinda Lake, who is always so generous to join us because she is a busy person, as is Kristen Davison. And bring them both in. There's Kristen. I lost Celinda. What happened? Let's see. Maybe I did something wrong. Hit the wrong button. All right. There you go. Unmuted. Kristen and Celinda, thank you both for joining. Very, very generous of you, as always. Have you two been on together before?
I think so. I think
think
one.
so.
I thought you
Yeah.
were. I thought you were. You're a
And it's
familiar
great to
parent.
see you again.
Let's start off, Slinda, with you. I saw you quoted in some newspaper today saying, like, Donald Trump is going to be our best friend here. Let the policies work themselves out, and then we'll be able to frame them and compete in the marketplace of ideas. From just an analytical point of view, I know you don't agree with his policies, but from an execution point of view, how do you think Team Trump has done in the first 2 days?
Brilliant. And he showed the power of solo executive leadership. He's shown that he brings about change. He's been decisive. He seemed on top of it. He seemed confident. And I think he did a really good job. And his numbers are improving. And
Kristen,
even though
yeah,
people
keep going, sorry.
disagree with his policies, they think he's doing a good job.
Kristen Davison, you could scarcely top that as a praise, but do you agree, or are you even more effusive, or did Slinda go too far?
No, I was going to say keep going. I'll just let you take a few more minutes if you want. No, I think they did a great job, and this term is going to be, obviously so many differences from the last one, but there's such a sense of urgency here on the onset, which I think one is what the American people voted for and what they wanted. They wanted decisive leadership. They wanted someone to show, meaningful leadership, and I think, Trump signed 26 executive action, yesterday. I think Biden was the closest with 9. And so this is showing American people that he's going to listen. And I think they realize that, this isn't a first term. They're going to have to get out the gate quickly and deliver wins. And, come Labor Day, we're going to be looking at the midterms and people will be talking about other things. So it's a very quick runway for them. And I think they're tackling it brilliantly, to Celinda's point.
Celinda, which policies are unpopular? Because some of them are popular. But which policies are unpopular besides the J6 pardons?
The J6 pardons,
yeah,
for sure. A number of the policies, birthright citizenship, doing away with birthright citizenship, very unpopular with people. And it's interesting because it divides the Republican coalition, Cuban Americans, and Venezuelan Americans, some of the people who are most against it, who doing away with it. I mean, you have pockets of opposition. I mean, most people have no idea where McKinley or Denali Mountain is, but the people who know where it is want it called Denali. Right. Most people think that it would be ridiculous to try to send Marines in to get the Panama Canal. And I think a lot of these things we haven't pulled on. I think what's really important is for us not to get distracted by some of the things like Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America kind of stuff, and really focus on the real things. And also what he's not talking about. He didn't talk about making the wealthy pay their fair share. He didn't talk about prescription drug prices. He could do that by executive order. So there's a lot of things he's not doing that are very popular, and a lot of things he is doing that are very unpopular.
Kristen, I know you both think they're doing quite well, and I think it'd be hard to deny that. If Karen Hughes called you tonight and said, thank you for your praise, I saw you on two-way, but what could we be doing better? What would you say?
So we already, you could already predict where the media, for example, was going to be outraged. So the January 6 pardons and birthright citizenship. A lot of this is pretty, you can see around the corner of where the outrage is going to be. There's an opportunity there to get one step ahead of where the outrage is going to be. So, there are 1,500 January 6 people who were pardoned. There's definitely going to be a little old lady in there that did nothing wrong, was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Like, bring those people to the forefront to kind of buttress some of the criticism that's coming off the bat with immigration. Bring back so many of those families whose lives have been impacted because an illegal immigrant, killed their sister or, committed a crime, to emphasize the root of why immigration was at the top of every voter's mind, Democrat and Republican. Put human faces to some of these things, that it's very easy for MSNBC or someone on Twitter or, a former Democrat candidate to criticize something that they don't believe, but it's very hard to, stare in the face of a regular American and say you're wrong. So that would be one thing I think they can expand on, the good job that they're doing. They can kind of see around the corner. We all see where, the media's heads are going to explode. Go ahead and beat them to the punch and, make them scratch their heads a little bit on how to respond.
Yeah. I think the other thing, if I could advise Chris to advise her, I think Trump is extremely comfortable with being wealthy and being surrounded by wealthy people and helping wealthy people. And I think it was pretty astounding that the billionaires were all ahead of the cabinet, ahead of the Supreme Court, ahead of the generals. And, he very comfortably takes the question, how much did you make on cryptocurrency? Melania starts her own. I think the wealthy and every inaugural, in my opinion, has too much pictures of wealthy people in gowns and fur coats and diamond rings, etc. So I think the other thing that he needs to do is get more average people out there.
Yeah.
And when average people are contrasting the rise in egg prices, which frankly isn't even his fault, and with diamond rings and cocktail gowns, that's going to be a little bit of a tension there.
Yeah. I got a million questions for you, but we're going to break format a little bit because, again, we only have Celinda for part of the show. So if you'd like to ask a question that Celinda and Kristen can answer on any topic, because except with the possible exception of the 1942 New York Jets, these two ladies can address anything. So please raise your hand. We'll get to you in a minute. I'm going to ask, I think, two more. Celinda, you mentioned the wealthy people. Have you looked at data on whether Elon Musk is popular?
Oh, Elon Musk is fascinating because Elon Musk is very unpopular with women and very popular with men, particularly younger men. And Elon Musk dominated social media coverage and Twitter. But the other person that dominated social media coverage was AOC. So there's a real division here by gender, by age, and by circumstance. And I think Elon Musk is going to be a real liability because he's going to go in to cut Social Security. He's going to give Heil Hitler salutes, and he's going to give thumbs up to spending all the money on going to Mars rather than on providing health care for people.
All right, I'm not gonna open the salute can of worms because it's a complicated topic. Kristen, if you were if a candidate of yours had the opportunity to campaign with Musk, given them, I think is Linda's right. There's a mixed view of him. Is that would you take that? Would you let Musk campaign with your candidate, or would it depend?
It probably depends on where, right? Where they want to campaign, what state. But of course, I mean, not even just because of who he is. He's obviously been a force in the universe. Just he's a difference maker. You can't deny that, whether you like him or hate him. He's done a lot of great things. But right now, he really, I think, is seen as someone who speaks not for Trump. No one speaks for Trump, but someone aligned with him. And so having him, campaign with your candidate in some of these states is, having a good spokesperson from the Trump MAGA movement for sure. So yeah, I think, obviously you take each case. I never want to say absolute anything, but I can't see a scenario really where I would say, no, don't come.
All right, a little news out of the Trump press conference, and again, his second sit there and take a lot of questions in 2 days. Friday, he's going to North Carolina to visit victims of the hurricane, and then he's going to California, to Los Angeles, to visit people at the wildfires. So I have one of my huge flaws as a reporter, and probably a human, is I overreact. I tend to think a little bit more extreme, and I really do think the Democratic Party, Celinda, is in bad shape right now. And I know you're an extremely patient person, so you're not overreacting. Haley Barbour, former RNC chairman, governor of Mississippi. Some have heard me say this word. He's got two great aphorisms that he uses that are in direct conflict. One is, in politics, good gets better and bad gets worse. And the other is, in politics, nothing is ever as good or bad as it seems. Right? So they're in conflict. I think things are getting worse for the Democrats. I really think the competence and aggressiveness of the Trump people, the relative unity, the speaker fight notwithstanding, of the Republican Party, and the lack of agreement about why did Harris lose, about what the step forward is, no clear leaders. So, Celinda, make the case either way. Is what's going on with the Democrats good gets better and bad gets worse for now, or is it not as bad as it seems, at least as bad as it seems to me?
I think it's not as bad as it seems. And I have my own metaphor from Montana, which I'm an avid angler and fisherman. And when you're trying to catch a big fish, we have a saying, keep the line taut, but let it out. And I believe let Trump go and then draw distinctions. Don't follow every bite. Don't pull in the line when he says he's going to change the Gulf of Mexico. And he's going to make a lot of big mistakes for a lot of unpopular policies. And then it's our moment. This is his moment. Give him his moment. And hopefully he'll take that line way out and we can pull him in.
How late would you will go before feeling like now it's gone on too long? We got to pull it in. Like, are you talking about weeks, months?
Oh, I think we're talking about weeks.
Weeks. Okay. Kristen, what to you are the 2 or 3 biggest differences about Trump 2.0 compared to the last time?
Well, there are two different audiences as well, right? So there's a difference between the way we, people, just the rest of the country is viewing it. So that's one big difference. We've already kind of seen the first show, and we've seen how bad, if you voted for Trump, you've seen how bad it was when he left, and so you are welcoming this new term. For the actual administration itself, just tactically, they are more, they seem more organized. And he also seems, not that he was bashful the first time around, but he is just grabbing it by the horn and not holding back and not caring what anyone says. And that really is what Americans wanted. Americans were tired. I mean, you just see it in the results. And I'm sure, Celinda, you've sat in focus groups hearing it. I mean, people are just tired of being preached to, of being so careful. And Trump just goes out there and says, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to get it done. You didn't see that as much the first time, I think, because he was probably still navigating, the process and his team and what he wanted to do. This time he's already been there, done that. He's seen how bad it can be when he's not there, and he's not wasting any time. And that is a huge difference that I think will not only, provide for a lot of results very quickly, but for his legacy long term, I think is going to do, he's going to be viewed very, very favorably down the road.
Well, see, I think the results are actually going to be his vulnerability. What happens when one of those, and God willing, I pray it doesn't happen, but he was too indiscreet in his releasing of all the 1,500 January 6th people. There's some very violent, very bad people in there. What happens when one of them, takes on their kid who turned them in, or their ex-wife that turned them in, or whatever? What happens when a family gets separated in deportation and the child is separated from the parent? What happens when the debt ceiling goes in and then Social Security gets cut back? So I think he's very good at the TV show, but I don't think he's as good at policy. Kristen, I think you said a very important thing, which is he knows the power now. This is the challenge for the Democrats. I think in 2017, he was as surprised as we were, or maybe more, and didn't know all the levels of power that he has. He does now. He knows exactly what he's doing. But in that is probably one of his biggest problems. The other thing I would say is right now, the Democrats should focus on the Democrats. We need to get our economic brand together. We need to do grass organizing. We need to elevate the healthcare issue, which is one of our strongest issues. We have a lot of fixing to do on our side. We should be concentrating on us and let him run it out a little bit till voters see the real distinction.
Celinda, besides Schumer and Jeffries, the leaders, who's a Democrat now talking about economics, about healthcare that you think's doing a good job? You don't need to say they're the absolute best, but who's someone you think's doing a good job now?
I think that AOC is doing a really good job. She's obviously has strong viewpoints, but I think she's doing an excellent job. She was the top getter on social media. I think that the governors are doing a great job. It hasn't been noticed so much nationally, but in every state, you've got governors giving very, very successful state of the state addresses and laying out a Democratic alternative. And there are 36 governorships up in 2026. A lot of our strength may be at the state and local level.
All right.
The farm teams.
Yeah. All right. I'm bringing in 2 folks at once because Johnny is a first time, long time, which is our favorite category. And Chris Simmons, just this morning, we were saying, where's Chris Simmons been? He hasn't been here in a while. Chris is a Democrat from Georgia, just disappeared. We'll bring him back.
There we
go. Johnny, where are you from?
Hey, Mark. Hi, everyone. I'm from Boston, but I live in San Diego now with my wife.
Okay. Well, welcome in. Thank you for joining. Why don't, Johnny, you go first, then Chris, both ask what you want, and then Celinda and Kristen will engage. And grateful to you both for being here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad that I'm up with Chris. I'm really curious what he thinks about this. But so bring up everyone's favorite topic, January 6th. So it's a tough one for me. Like, I'm an officer in the military, but it's almost like I'm put in a position to defend these people when in reality, like, I think it was a sad, disgusting day. But like, AOC like fake hiding in an off place office building. I think she was in Hart, like acting like, the place was being overrun by people with guns.
Johnny, let me stop you. This is such a complicated topic. We talked about it this morning. And I know I'm going to cut you off, but super complicated. I don't want this conversation to be based on your characterization of AOC, because I would say, even if you characterized it correctly, I would ask you what that has to do with judging the punishment of the people who were convicted.
Well, my point is that, like, even Dan, who I love and I think is probably one of the most informed and educated people, like even Dan, up until a few days ago, thought that January 6th perpetrators killed cops. And that's like totally false. And that's been false. So if Dan doesn't even know that,
Yeah,
then I can't
Johnny,
imagine what other people think.
I'm interrupting you with respect just to say, you're right. Some people have gotten the facts wrong, but people who believe it was a horrible day for the country, as you do, look at what you're doing now. And again, I'm saying this with respect because we're trying to have a conversation to bring understanding across the board. Dan having the facts wrong, again, that's not the issue for a lot of people. The issue is what they did, okay, and who they were. They were not FBI moles. They were not Antifa. They were supporters of President Trump who went to the Capitol and committed crimes for which they were prosecuted and convicted and sentenced, sometimes by Trump-nominated judges.
No,
That's not
and so, and
none
I,
of that.
so
No, no, just
I,
let me just say, I want you to focus, if you would, on that, not
okay.
what for you are mitigating factors, not because you're not allowed to have mitigating factors for you, but I'm trying to create understanding for the people, and half the people in the country who can't understand your point of view of saying, well, Dan doesn't have all the facts, so maybe these people should be pardoned. Just
But there's
focus on them. Should they be, to forget all the external things of the type you mentioned, should they have been pardoned given what they did and the legal process they went through?
No, I don't really think so.
Okay.
But like I said, I feel as though I'm put in a position to kind of defend them because,
Yep.
like I said, I feel like the hand, like always, is totally overplayed,
Yep.
like I still have friends where I can't talk to them about anything political without them saying, but January 6th, but January 6th.
Johnny, I totally appreciate what you said. I want to get Celinda because, again, we're going to lose her pretty soon. What
Okay.
you just said is super important as far as I'm concerned. You said, no, they shouldn't be pardoned. But the people on the left, and not even people on the left, anyone who thinks what President Trump did is outrageous needs to hear what you just said, which is you're obviously very intelligent and thoughtful person. You're saying you feel you feel somewhat compelled to defend them because of these other factors, and you very explain some of them. That's really important for people who oppose what President Trump did to understand that reasonable, thoughtful people like you feel ambivalent about it for the reasons you said. Celinda.
Wow. I mean, Johnny, I have great respect for what you're saying. And I just believe that independent of the factors, and I do believe that people were attacked and that very, very brave officers were defending America and defending our people and kept people from being killed. But independent of that, I'm kind of with you that there was a legal process here. It was followed. There were Trump judges and Biden judges, and we shouldn't have had a blanket pardon. And that's just wrong. And I think it's dangerous.
Well, it wasn't blanket, right?
Well,
It was pretty
15
close
of
to
the
blanket.
1600. I mean, it's pretty blanket. And they didn't have time to really assess people in between. I
Yeah.
mean, if you decided that 100 people were wrongly charged or something, that'd be one thing. But just to let out, I don't know. I think it's a pretty fundamental undermining. But mostly, I like what you said, Johnny, in the very beginning, and I really agree with this. It was a really sad day for America.
Yeah, and I'm a 3-time Trump voter, and I hated to see that.
Yeah.
It was
And I'm
gross.
a 3-time Democratic voter, and I hated to see that.
But
we're together on this.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily agree with bringing in the whole like, oh, Trump judges versus Biden judges, because does that mean that they're all hacks that are just going to let people go for political reasons? No, they're professional jurists. But like, on the Supreme Court, for example, you never have to wonder what the Democrat justices are going to vote. It's always, one of the conservative justices that's deciding these big cases. So does that just mean that these
I think,
Republican justices are
Chris, you'll get in plenty.
conviction?
Johnny, I think the point of pointing out, as for me at least, the Trump judges is to try to give people confidence in the system, that this isn't Democratic prosecutors, Democratic juries, and Democratic picked judges making these decisions. Okay. And I'm trying so hard. I know because I have for the last 2 days been attacked by both sides. I'm trying not to. Celinda appreciates you're saying it was a horrible day, and you appreciate the fact that there needs to be accountability. People who oppose this need to appreciate, or at least hear, Johnny's mitigating factors to understand. So there's not anger at everybody who says either I support the pardons or I'm ambivalent about the pardons. You're a thoughtful person, so people should consider that. Celinda, I know you may need to go, so you'll drop off whenever you need to.
Yeah,
Thank
but
you
I'd
for
love to hear
joining.
Chris's question.
All right, Chris, go ahead. Question or comment? Chris is, for those who don't know, he is not a 3-time Trump voter, to say the least.
So can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir. Hear you great.
So I've got a comment for Johnny. Maybe it's a question that's a comment. How do you square J.D. Vance saying that violent offenders shouldn't be pardoned, and then Trump goes and does it? Now, he has the same concerns about the left overplaying their hand that you do, but he said clearly that the violent ones shouldn't be pardoned. And secondly, you don't have to take the left's interpretation of what happened that day. If you saw the video that day, you saw what the people did. The people who were prosecuted for beating officers were filmed doing it, and they used facial recognition to know he did it. So we don't have to wonder how many FBI agents were there, like I see some people writing in the chat, and all these other theories. I think the fact that even people like you still are trying to find a reason to let him off the hook is really an example of how brilliant a politician Trump is. And I give him that. He's brilliant. He's got us fighting each other so hard. We're just, it's like skins and shirts in basketball back in the day. And once you line up with your team, you will then find some reason to let your guy off the hook. But you saw it yourself on TV.
Johnny,
and then I have a question for Celinda before she leaves.
Okay, real quick. Let me say one thing.
So you mentioned, but like Biden pardoned a cop killer, and the FBI union just came out and bashed him for it.
Right, but Johnny, let me say the thing Chris said. I just want to put an exclamation point on, because this is what people on your side really need to understand about people on the other side. And I say with respect to Sean did it this morning. You all appear to constantly be looking for an excuse to say I'm okay with the pardons. It's just
I just said I wasn't, though.
Well, but when Chris and I hear you say Biden pardoned an FBI, someone the FBI didn't want pardoned, that to the ears of tens of millions. We're not being critical of you. I'm trying to build understanding here. Tens of millions of people hear what Sean said this morning, what you just said, and they say you're just looking to give us a laundry list of reasons why you're ambivalent, rather than these people did a horrible thing, and particularly ones who acted violently should be punished. Stop. But I'm asking them to understand why you're citing these things, because you feel there's a fundamental inequity, and I think both sides need to consider that point of view. They hear excuses, but you think of them as legitimate reasons to feel ambivalent, and tens of millions of people are represented by your 2 points of view. All right, hold on, Johnny. Chris, question for Celinda, because she's nice enough to still be here in overtime.
So Celinda, my question for you is, do you think Democrats like yourself are doing a good job of fighting the overblown narrative about America voted Trump in, when in fact he had the smallest margin of victory than anybody in recent history? And I've actually done the math.
Yeah.
And all you needed to have done was convert 1 out of 40 Trump voters in 3 swing states.
Yeah.
And Harris would be president. That's not a mandate. But I don't hear people like you when Kristen says 3 times, America wanted XYZ. I want to hear you, Celinda, and I want to hear Daniel in the morning say, Yeah, America barely. Obama had a bigger margin. Biden had a bigger margin. Nobody's had a smaller margin to win the presidency in recent history. That's fact.
Celinda.
Yeah, I think you're really right, Chris. And I think the way it was covered and the election night of sweeping all of the swing states, and Trump makes this argument very well, and the winning the popular vote and the way it felt like he ran the table on all three branches of government made people think, and real people think, that he had an overwhelming margin. And he didn't. You're absolutely right. And he had like a third of the vote. 2/3 of the people either didn't vote for him or stayed home. So I think you're absolutely right. I don't think we've done a very good job. And I think we let this narrative get away from us. And in part, we kind of internalized it because he ran the table, but he ran the table by a very narrow margin. I think the most important thing we've got to do is we've got to lay out our alternative. This election, in my opinion, was a great reveal about some problems on the economy, on speaking to the grassroots that have been brewing for some time. And I think we got to deal with those problems. But you're right, we've done a terrible job. And as someone who's often giving numbers and stuff, I've done a terrible job. Absolutely agree with you.
Kristen, I'm going to tease with purpose here. You've been remarkably silent when we've talked about this. You're normally a very admirably chatty person. Thanks to Celinda Lake, who had to go, but very grateful to her. Kristen, before you get your chance, eager as you are to talk about January 6th, I want to play a soundbite. This is from that Trump press conference. Peter Alexander of NBC News asking President Trump about the pardons, and Donald Trump, because he likes to counterpunch, says something bad about Peter. Play that, please.
On the election, we won this election in a landslide because the American public is tired of people like you that are just one-sided, horrible people in terms of crime. You don't talk about all the people that have been killed and what happens to those murderers. Murderers get no time. You take a look at some of these DAs. They go after political opponents, but they don't go after people that shoot people in the street.
All right, so he calls him a horrible person, kind of pushing back. All right, Kristen, you've heard a great conversation, I thought, but Johnny and Chris and Celinda, tell us your view of the conversation that you heard.
Man, I thought I was going to get away with that one. I really did.
Yeah, I know. I know you did, but
yeah, no, I think, again, both points of view, both sides, I understand, what people feel. And I don't think one side is, wrong for, it was a terrible day. I don't think anyone could see that day and think we would want to go back to that. I think I will say one thing that I disagree with when Johnny, and President Trump bring up these other examples. I think that really underscores why President Trump was able to win over people who potentially didn't like him the first time around or the second time around. And what I mean by that is when we say, well, Biden pardoned his entire family for crimes we don't know about, and Biden, gave clemency to someone who executed two FBI agents. That underscores, I think, the entire, movement and shift towards Trump. I don't think there are people out there that love him. He can do no wrong. January 6th was a fine day. They should all be pardoned. There are those people for sure, but they didn't decide the election. Trump had them. They were going to show up, whether, it was mail or in person or snow or whatever. The people that decided the election were the people who potentially sat home in 2020 or voted for Biden in 2020, or who really didn't think he was going to win in 2016, who really don't, think they have their issues with his leadership style or some of the things he does. But the prospect of the alternative was so frightening to them that they were able to forgive the things that they did not like about President Trump and go in there and pull the lever for him. I think that that is it's not just a list of excuses. Seeing what the Biden and Harris administration had done over the last 4 years, take it back to the Clintons, take it back to Obama and the IRS and the FBI and everything, the using government in ways that, were just shocking. People see that. And I think it makes them have a little bit more of a leniency to some of the things they may not totally agree with. So when you say no Republican wants to say that it's bad, I don't think there are many who would say January 6th was a great day. I'm sure there's some people who do, but most people thought it was a horrible day not everyone agrees with everything that President Trump does every single day, but the alternative was so frightening and so, antithetical to where we want our country to go that, there was no other option except to vote for President Trump and to stand with him now in the first 24 hours of his administration.
Right. But it's not for so many people who are really upset about January 6th and about the pardons. It's not about a voting issue. I think people can say, yeah, we didn't like the immigration record, et cetera. But think again, it's to say it's okay. It was a horrible day, but it's okay he pardoned them because the Democrats have done a lot of stuff. That just rubs a lot of people the wrong way, in part because, I'll say this on behalf of the right, they don't appreciate how much Americans are offended by a lot of things the Democrats did. But it's also the case that really in a rational world, you should judge whether you think the pardons were righteous or not on their own. It has nothing to do with Barack Obama. It's got nothing to do with Joe Biden. Should the President of the United States have given a mass pardon to people without careful scrutiny for people who were duly convicted, some of whom I'll say, for violence? That is where I just really bothered by, like I said, I'm bothered by people on the left not appreciating the people on the right's calculus, not about voting, but about judging the overall political environment. But I really wish people on the right could understand how the mitigation listing and the rush to mitigating listing really bothers people.
Yeah, no, I that's a fair point. And I don't know, we were starting right as I think the president was wrapping up his press conference. I thought that he had said something like, well, we need to look into, so he was asked a specific case about one of the individuals that had a violent offense, and he said they were going to look more into it. So I don't know if they've all gone through or whatnot. I mean, I think if there was, I don't know. I have to go back and look and see that video if they were going to, relook at some of them. But yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I also, it's not even just the right. It's not even just Republicans. It's average Americans who don't, sit and think about this every day, but they have the two options. And I'm not talking about speaking for myself or the right or anyone. I'm talking about just the average person who was presented with the choice and seeing, actions like this. They may not like it. They may say it was wrong, but they're looking at two, parties and two choices, and both have disappointed. Let's just say hypothetically in that situation, Trump is still the one that they believe is going to make their lives better. And to I think Chris made the point that he is, a political talent and be able to kind of weather some of those concerns. And I think it goes beyond that. Trump is not just a political talent. I mean, voters vote based on who can do something for me, who can take care of me. And Trump's been the only one. The Democrat Party has lost touch of that. So we can go back and forth. I don't really know what it meant, to your point that no Republican will say, I disagree with the pardons. What does that matter? I mean, at the end of the day, these voters.
For the same reason Republicans and some independent people and some Democrats say, I don't like that Joe Biden pardoned his family. Because it's important to have on the national town square to say what's right and wrong for our kids. My son's 8, so probably not that interested in this. Definitely not that interested in this. But if my son were a college student and he said, Dad, was it okay for Joe Biden to pardon his family? Or was it okay for President Trump to pardon J6? Most people I know who are not so tribal that they never will say anything bad about their tribe think they were both horrible. Right. Most people I know who aren't obsessed with politics and aren't in a tribe, they think both were horrible. And they would say to a kid, their high school or college age kid, they shouldn't have done that. Their rationale for doing that was not in the public interest. And I think that's what we need. Yes, Chris.
Can we at least get Kristen, for the benefit of the Trumpers on the call, to admit the fact that his margin was paper thin in the key states, in the swing states, and his electoral college margin was high. But my 1 out of 40, I've done the math. He does not have a mandate the way people like to talk about it. Can you at least admit that?
Well, it was a plurality, right? Not a majority. So if you're,
I don't want to get into that. Just
well, that's
he barely
went
won
up
in the
with
key
all
states.
Democratic constituencies and down with Republican constituencies.
I'll let Kristen answer, but then I'll answer.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I do think the reason why, to your point, I mean, they're a swing state for a reason. They're not going to win by 100,000 votes. It's going to be a very close race. When you look back to 2016, when you had Hillary Clinton challenging the results in Michigan, we all forget, and challenging the results in Wisconsin, you didn't have any of that this time. The election was called before most people went to bed. And so it was the first time in two presidential cycles, that we had a conclusion. We were all talking about how it was going to be Thanksgiving until we knew who was going to, win the race, because the polls were so close, because you saw things that were moving on the ground, because, Harris was trying to close, strong. We were all talking about how it was going to be very close, and it wasn't. It was very decisive. And to your point, it had been two presidential elections. Like, we did not have that decisive outcome in the last two. People were still up in the air when they went to bed. This time, we all knew who the president was going to be. There was no question. It was outside the margin of error in these swing states. We were not debating, waiting for Pennsylvania's mail vote to come in, right? We knew who was going to win. And that's why, was it a landslide? No, but when you win, you get to say that, right? The winners write the history books. So, but it wasn't a coin toss. Now, I think instead of saying we need to fight, my advice to Democrats, because I really want competition in the future. It's boring when you win all the time to steal that from Trump. So I want Democrats to get their lives back here a little bit, instead of focusing on why are we arguing about, the margin of victory or this and that. Like, go and see why you didn't get the 1 in 40. Go and figure that part out. That's what you guys need to be talking about, because from what I see, every time a Democrat goes on TV and bemoans something about how this is unconstitutional, we have checks and balances. And if there's something that's really unconstitutional, it's going to work itself out. Go figure out why,
why we didn't get the 1 in 40.
Yeah. Chris.
Well, they need to figure that part out.
Wrong candidate.
Yeah. Well, you guys picked her. Just kidding. Chris, let me just say this. And you asked Chris, and I agreed with everything she said, and particularly all of it, and the last part especially. The contest was in 7 states. There was no ambiguity.
Right.
Trump won them all. And as Kristen said, he won them all in the context of our 50-50 nation and the battleground states. He won them all decisively. There was no challenges in the 7 states. Number 2, you look at the trend. The movement was towards Trump in 50 states. And demographically, movement towards Trump in every demographic that moves significantly. Okay? So, and I think that to me, the kicker of it all is you all, maybe not you, but you, the people who didn't want him, told me in 2021, Trump cannot win another election after January 6th. Biden people said to me, there's no one in America who didn't vote for Trump in 20 who will vote for him in 24. They told me that decisively. No one, not very many. They said no one because of January 6th and election denialism and legal cases. Millions voted for Trump, switched from Biden to Trump, or didn't vote or whatever. So if you put it in that context, as Kristen said, not a landslide, but Trump ran on things that you find and tens of millions of people find objectionable. Not just pardoning J6, but tax cuts for the wealthy, changing NATO. A bunch of stuff, border policies a lot of people disagree with, and he won decisively, clearly, not a landslide. But I could argue your position too, but to me the preponderance of the argument, the stronger argument is Trump has a mandate because the Democrats said he couldn't win, and he won unambiguously. That's what I think. Johnny, do you want to say anything else?
No, I apologize for opening up this can of worms, but
no, that's all right. That's all right. I'd like to do a day-long conversation on this because it's so complicated. And this morning, Sean objected to talking about it at all. But it's important.
I'd like it to be over someday so that we can discourse again.
Yeah.
But
well, I think it will be. I think unless the people Trump pardons start committing more crimes, which would be a problem politically for Trump, I think the country's going to move on because it is distasteful, and we just had a peaceful transfer, but we'll see. Johnny, love that you came on. I hope you'll come back regularly.
Thanks. I got the J press on for you.
Very nice. I like what was that? Was that light blue? What is that?
Yeah, it's just a light blue.
That's a light blue. All right, looks nice. Chris Simmons, don't be a stranger, my friend. Please come back more often. We miss you. We need you here. All right, Kristen, thank you for staying with us. Let's bring somebody else in. Al Chang. Al Chang, can you name a Major League Baseball player whose entire name was 5 letters?
No, I'm not really a sports person.
Not a sports person. All right, that's fair. How about 6 letters? Chris Simmons, six letters. You got one? Major League Baseball player, 6 letters.
Is that Chris or me?
I'm asking Chris. You already said you're not going to know.
Okay.
Chris doesn't know either. All right, I'm muting Chris. The correct answer I was looking for, Mel Ott. Mel Ott, Major Hall of Famer. Welcome in, Al. Tell folks who don't know where you are and what's on your mind for Kristen.
I'm from California. And I'm in Oakland, California.
Welcome
Can you
in.
hear me?
Yes, sir. Ty Cobb, also 6 letters. Why does Chris Simmons keep coming back? Who's doing that? Can't figure out how that's happening. Go ahead, Al. What's your question or comment?
God, I hate that you open that can of worms, but I've heard you cover this a couple times, and I just feel I need to chime in on this. And
yes, sir.
So on the J6 thing, I think it's a horrible day, but I also think that people aren't looking at, you yourself haven't looked at the particular cases, not for the 100 people that, everybody can agree that that was probably a bad thing, but, there's 1,000 people. And, I haven't looked too deeply in it, but what I have seen for the folks that, there was 100% conviction rate, and people were forced to, basically, they knew they'd go to jail for 20 years if they didn't accept the plea. And, the prosecutors have a very strong hand to play in that. And especially in a place where they know that if they didn't accept the plea, that they would go to jail. And also, none of the people could raise money. They couldn't, all their PayPals were canceled. They were evicted out of their homes. And, one could say that they were punished for 4 years to get to this point.
Yep.
And so I don't, I don't know if that can really be overlooked. I saw some things on like X Twitter of these folks that, they had no way of, 3 to 4 years of their lives were spent on this. They were, their lives were ruined financially. They were ruined. They had no way of like defending themselves. And I don't know if we can, people are looking at it here in terms of the media lens on it, where, yes, the video was awful, right? But we also know that that was produced by people, and in the media, we know that we are seeing one side of it that has been edited. There was a choice of what we saw, and so I think that is something that people consider, to Kristen's point of view, that I think if you've been following it, and I don't know if you have, like you said yourself, like you weren't actually looking at the 1,000 cases, and it might be worth, looking at a couple of hundred of the people that people have been following for 3 or 4 years, looking at their cases. And I think people feel for that in a way that if you're just watching, ABC, NBC, or what we're talking about here, that we actually aren't looking at those people,
Yeah.
And
Al,
I think that's, something that people.
Let me just say one thing about what you said, and then
Sure.
and then I'd like Kristen to respond on your first point. That's something President Trump has cited, the notion that they've been punished in one way or another in multiple ways for several years. Are you a fan of the TV show Beretta? Probably too young to have watched.
No, I remember that. Sure.
Okay.
From the
don't do the crime if you can't do the time.
For sure.
It's unfortunate if in this country, if you go to prison or jail, there are societal effects. You're less likely to get a job, etc. On your second point, I know the media has done a lot. The liberal media has done a lot to earn the distrust of a lot of people in America. But however misleading what they showed on ABC and CBS was, that's not what convicted them. They weren't convicted by juries and judges who were basing the evidence on what they saw on ABC. They were basing it on evidence presented in court. So the media can be biased, but they weren't convicted because of the media coverage.
I'm not saying they were. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that, to Kristen's point, for the folks that we discuss, you haven't had 4 years of people following the cases of folks that were, and again, I agree with your point, actually. I'm just saying that, if we want to really understand the other side of it, and the folks that, to point to Kristen, who made, the folks that made the decision on this, I think we need to understand that people have been following the plight of some of these folks for 3 or 4 years, right? Feeling that it's probably the same people that were like in North Carolina, that feels like, if you weren't in the Palisades or had the focus of the government, of folks, that you were forgotten. And, that if you were in the position that these people were in, that you would basically have no chance, right? I mean, there were people who said, I was there for 8 minutes, and there was like a video, and because they posted it to Twitter, that was they were shut down, and that, and I feel for that. Like I look
Yeah.
at that, and I say, if you were in that position where, they were going to prosecute you, and that was important, that you that there is, when federal prosecutors go after you, you have no chance. Like you will lose, right?
Yeah.
So
No,
it's,
Al, no
are you going to,
question.
yeah, and I think what I'm saying is people
Yeah.
followed that, and I don't think people are, and I don't know, I'm not going to speak for America in that, but
Yeah.
I'm just saying that when I see what, you need to kind of look at the folks uh, that that they go, oh, my time is over. That that you actually have to see, what I see on Twitter is the people who were like, thank you, my nightmare is over, kind of folks. And I look at that and I can't not feel for that person,
Very,
and
very, very
I
well said.
think,
And again, you said you
right,
weren't speaking for America, but your point of view
you
reflects
know,
the point of view of tens of millions. Let me just ask you one
yeah,
question. If you were
sure.
in Washington that day and you heard President Trump speak and you went up to the Capitol and people started using violence and opposition to police and Capitol Police to go in the building, would you have gone in the Capitol?
No.
No. So
No,
again,
I
it's
probably would
un
have just gotten out of there in general,
yeah, yeah.
you know,
So I mean,
you
again,
know,
every case is
you know,
separate. There's every
yeah.
like the snowflake, they're all separate. But those people, every case is different. But to go into the Capitol under those circumstances is to be part of a mob. Just is, just by definition. So it's unfortunate if people were convicted unjustly, but they
I
they
think
went
what
up
I
they went
saw
up
was
there
people
and
that
chose
did
to go
not
in.
actually go into the building itself,
Yeah,
right? And I think that's the part where I look at it. And again, each case is different, but there were
yeah,
people that seemed like they did not go in the building. They were simply standing outside,
yeah,
or certainly nobody would be willing to stand up for these people or post anything about it. And some of the folks with their plea deals were unable until now to speak about their case because part of the plea is that you can't talk about it. So I don't know. I would personally like to know and hear the people that took the deals, what their side of the story was,
yep,
because
absolutely,
we were not able to hear their side of the story, right?
absolutely,
And I
absolutely.
think that
Totally
would
agree
be
with that.
something that America, like that would help, calm the waters, or
Yep,
to be able to hear that side, because we really and we're starting to hear the side of the story, and that's one of the things where I say, like, I listened to those stories and I was like, oh wow, it wasn't what I thought it was, right?
yep,
Because part of them not going to jail is to not be able to tell the story, and now I'm hearing it for the first
yep,
time, and
yep.
I think we should at least have an open mind until we hear the story
100%.
of those
Every
folks.
individual, they should
I
not be
think
lumped together. It should all be individual.
Th
Kristen,
that's
thoughts
exactly what I think. Yeah.
thoughts about what
Uh,
Al said?
You
yeah.
know, I it's I kind of empathize with Sean on the show this morning a little
Yeah.
bit because you kind of get through and you're like, oh, we're still talking about January 6th.
Yeah.
I understand where
Yeah.
he's come from. And I think a lot of people like that way too. I also understand the in-depths of wanting to make sure that every case is handled the right way. Um, but I think if anything, let's take whether it was right or wrong, let's table that judgment for a second. Politically and from a messaging standpoint, it is unfortunate that in the first 24 hours where there have been a lot of really good executive orders signed to tackle immigration, and I saw some Democrats saying, well, he didn't sign an executive order on the economy. I'm not really sure what that would be, but taking steps to improve the economy. I mean, these are all big wins, decisive action. It is unfortunate that on this show and on other shows on TV and elsewhere, we're focusing so much on, well, this case and that case and this person and that person, instead of focusing on look what pulling out of the Paris Agreement is going to do for our economy, and look at what pulling out, so from a strategist standpoint, that's where I get frustrated, because it's like, oh, we had big wins. We need to be talking about that today. But that's not to diminish the points that everyone's making on it. I understand it's a very, emotional issue. So I get why people talk about it. But at some point, people are going to say, can we move on? Can we move on and heal as a country, and just, to quote the new president, make America great again here, right? I mean, that people will want to see progress, and not, and that's where I think it's a fine line for Democrats and some folks in the media, because if there's so much is focused on this, the hyperbolic rage, and I think that's what the point he was making to Peter Alexander, at some point, Americans don't want to hear it. It's 2025. It was a sad day. I don't want to read, not me, but like, person is saying, I don't want to read every single case. That's not going to affect whether or not I can send my kid to summer camp this summer. So that from a, totally unrelated standpoint, that's where I think, might have been a little bit of a missed moment here, just because there were so many good things, but it's getting a little, clouded, because obviously, there'll be so much focus on that part.
Right. Al, thank you. Really appreciate your articulating all that. Very grateful to you. Kristen, thank you. I always love when you're on. People, our audience, our community really appreciates your perspective. So thank you. All right, let me make one more pass at this, because I never look at the chat, except sometimes it catches my eye. There's two ways to think about January 6th in one perspective. One is, as I said, comparing it to other things. Okay, so compare it to the media cover-up of Joe Biden's acuity decline with the Democrats. Compare it to the student loan forgiveness. Compare it to the Biden pardons. Okay, and so for a lot of Americans who have a long list of things that they think the media and the Democrats have been outrageous on, they say, spare us your outrage of January 6th, because you've done so many things that are outrageous too. Okay, and again, for people who are attacking me and saying I need to do more research on the individual cases, or I'm anti-Trump, look at my record. Okay, I'm not. I'm for America. So for me, the reason I'm talking about it is when you take it, not comparing it to some outrage that the Democrats engaged in. If you take it just by itself, what you all who are supportive of the pardons, suspicious of the law enforcement account of January 6th, this is the worst thing for many Americans. For tens of millions of Americans, January 6th is the worst thing that's happened in this country during the Trump era. Okay, the worst thing, and they see it as an effort to destroy and stop the results of an election. Okay, so if you're at all serious about wanting to bring the country together, have mutual understanding, to appreciate what people who disagree with you believe, understand how strongly they feel about it. And it shouldn't be very difficult for you to credit that point of view, because after January 6th, many Republican members of Congress and citizens said this was horrible. But when you say this was horrible, no one would want to see it happen again, but, the people who think this was the worst thing that happened associated with Donald Trump, they get upset by that, because they say you're trying to hedge it. You're trying to look for excuses to minimize it. Okay? So I just ask people, I'll just say on the right as a shorthand, understand how strongly the people feel, tens of millions of your fellow countrywomen and countrymen, how strongly they feel, not only how outrageous it is, but that Donald Trump then pardoned them, and that the objections to the pardon are very minimal. There's some, but very minimal. Appreciate that. People on the left, please understand, you don't know, most of you, any better than I do, of the people who were pardoned, how many might have been worthy of a pardon. You don't know. Your instinct is to say they're all a bunch of gun-toting marauders who were there to kill Nancy Pelosi and Mike Pence. Okay? You just don't know. So appreciate that just as you think Trump painted with a broad brush when he pardoned nearly all of them and commuted some, you're painting with a broad brush when you say none of them are entitled to pardons. Okay? But you also have to appreciate, why do they feel that way? There are many thoughtful people who feel that the pardons were justified. And you need to think about why that is. Some people say they're justified because they have crazy, unproven theories. I won't say false, I'll say they're unproven, about the FBI luring people in and about it being Antifa. Okay, forget those people. There are a lot of very reasonable people in America who say there's so many outrageous things that Biden and Harris and the media and Adam Schiff have done that don't spare me your tears over January 6th. Okay? You need to understand why they feel that way, because they say, and most of them mean it, they think January 6th was horrible. And it's not, as I said, just about, well, they voted for Trump because they didn't like Harris's policies. Separate from the voting decision, they don't want to hear your outrage that January 6th is so much worse than anything the Democrats ever done. To give my favorite example, the Democrats and their media allies covered up for years, not for months, for years, Joe Biden's loss of mental acuity. And they've not acknowledged that any more than the Republicans have acknowledged Donald Trump's culpability in January 6th and the nature of the nature of the pardons. Okay? So everybody, I think, could reach a simple conclusion, which is covering up Biden's loss of mental acuity and what happened on January 6th and the pardons, blanket pardons, not research, not nuance, just blanket. I think everybody should agree neither of those things was good. But instead, what we have is a country, not most people, but the loudest angry voices on the national town square, unfortunately, some of them members of this community, just want to take one position or another. Biden's cover-up of Biden was horrible. January 6th, I get why Trump pardoned them. Or, I don't know anything about the cover-up of Biden's mental acuity, but man, those J6ers, right? That's what part of what this platform is for. And it's my orientation. I think it's pretty clear that what they did on January 6th was really bad, really bad. And Trump's blanket pardons without thoughtful consideration of each individual case, really bad. So is covering up for years with colluding with the media, Joe Biden's loss of mental acuity decline. It doesn't really seem that complicated to me. But the problem we have is a lot of our media is one tribal, one side or the other. And the problem is even people on this platform who are super thoughtful, people I know who are thoughtful because I've talked to them, attacking me in the chat, saying, Mark, you've gone off the deep end. Both on the left and the right. We can be better than that point of view. And the problem, again, is all the incentives in our system, in the media and in politics, is to be a loud, angry voice on the national town square. You want to get a book deal. You want to feel good about your tweet, is to be extreme one side or the other. It's really not sensible. And again, it's not just politics. This is serious stuff. This is serious stuff. And a president, loss of a mental acuity declines, staying in office. And we have a president now whose vice president said we shouldn't pardon violent offenders who attack police. Who did? Okay. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern time, we'll be back. Sean, Dan, and I don't know if we're going to talk about January 6th. There's a lot of other things to talk about, too. And I agree with the perspective that says we shouldn't be talking about this all the time. But we'll be back 9 a.m. Eastern time, and I'll be back tomorrow at this same time, 6 Eastern time, to talk about whatever happens. There'll probably be another Trump press conference. Very grateful to Celinda and for Kristen for being part of it, for everybody who asked the questions, for the dramatic, I would say, triumphal return of Chris. Haven't heard from him in a while. And to Johnny coming on for the first time, Al, everybody who participated. Very grateful to everybody. Good night, good luck, and be well. See you at 9 a.m.